Thanks, Kirsten, and thanks for having me and for putting the panel together. I don't know if some of you know or are new to NHMA, but when we put the symposium together, it really takes a lot of volunteers, including Link. I've got to mention you since you're the reason that this is even happening as the chair of our symposium committee. But Kirsten put all this, the panels together, speakers together, so thank you for doing that, and thank you guys for sticking around in the afternoon. Coming on the heels of Mark's, well, I guess a little bit myself, sorry, that's the boring part. I'm Erin with H2O Partners. I'm out of Austin, Texas. We're a consulting firm. We actually do a lot of mitigation grants, some of which are these Safe Room grants, which is my interest. I am a board member for NHMA. I got involved mainly how everybody else does with things that NHMA does. Somebody asks or you volunteer. So I got involved with NHMA for their CTP program, and we won't do alphabet soup. So they are a cooperating technical partner with FEMA. So they have a grant, and what this grant funds is the Resilient Neighbors Network, RNN. So sometimes we say NHMA CTP RNN, you know, then when we talk about the DRR, you know, ambassador program. I think nobody knows what we're talking about. So I wanted to briefly give some background on how this Safe Room report came to be. We are still editing this report, thanks to people like Mark that are giving us very helpful comments. As he showed too, there's a lot of new data that's coming out as well that we're very excited about. So it's not quite final yet, but a little bit of background on what the RNN is. It is a peer-to-peer networking, and what we're doing with that is trying to get lessons learned for sustainability and for resilience for these communities. Right now we have 10 of these pilot communities, and I say communities, one of which is the state of Vermont. So we have Pasadena, Texas, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Augusta, Georgia, and we have monthly calls. There's a lot of sharing between them. I think the project has really grown as we've gone from year one. You can see our accomplishments to year two. Looking at strengthening this, looking at getting more communities involved. We're really getting a lot better discussions too about, you know, what's working with your community and how did you get this funded, and you know, how did you get political support for this. So it's a project that's really fascinating, and I'm very excited to be a part of it. But one of the goals and one of the tasks that we told FEMA we would do, which we have done since we're getting money from them, was to put together a Safe Room report. And before I get into the Safe Room report, one of the things that we're doing for year two is the Disaster Risk Reduction Ambassador Program. A lot of the speakers may have received an email from Katie Skakel too about authorization forms. And what we're taking with year two and how we're expanding this peer-to-peer network is we want to do webinars that everyone can have access to build capacity. One of the first ones we want to do is actually on safe rooms. And we are looking at maybe, you know, end of August date to put that out. So that will be advertised once we get this together, but that's the next step is our DRR curriculum. And I'm not going to beat that to death because if you heard any of Ed Thomas's speech, you've already heard about it a lot, but please look it up. It's on the website too, and we're really excited to be rolling this out this next year. Okay. So the Safe Room report, as I said, it was part of this CTP program, part of the RNN. It was actually one of our final tasks that we put together. I did not draft the report. I kind of got called into the middle of it and helped edit it, and as I said, it's a project of love. It's still very much ongoing. I think it's currently 90 pages long. There's a lot of appendices there. But it looks at some of the historical occurrences, but it is focused mainly on central Oklahoma. There is a little bit about the Joplin tornadoes in there as well, but this was developed by Ann Patton from Tulsa, and so she was able to get a lot of research from Central Oklahoma, and of course Oklahoma's you know, one of the most at-risk states, or not the most, for tornadoes. So it made sense to start there and look at case studies. So the report itself, it does have, you know, historical occurrences and background, looks at the impact a little bit, types and issues, but some of the things I want to talk about today, I'll go over those others briefly, is the recommendations of the report, where we want to take this from here, and what that means going forward. As I said, I'm not going to go into detail on every single one of the statistics. It is in that report, and as you saw from Mark's presentation, is very detailed. But we're looking at Oklahoma, as I said, because of the high frequency of events for that state. In particularly, I mean, these are just 2 storms, but some of the major impact storms that we had, of course, the Moore, Oklahoma storm, as well as the 1999 one. The reason I bring up 1999, because after that storm, there's a quote from then President, Bill Clinton, who said, if you do anything, one of the things you can do is have a safe room. And I'm going to call out some people in the room, because we had a session on safe rooms, as Mark alluded to, on Tuesday. And we have Andy Vest in the room, who's the State Hazard Mitigation Officer for Oklahoma, as well as Brett Fiddler from the city of Tulsa. And so you guys feel free to interrupt me at any time. Would actually prefer that. And they really can talk to you all day long about the impact of tornadoes. But I wanted to bring up the 1999 event, and it was something that Brett mentioned too in his presentation on Tuesday, is how when he was growing up, that it was a little bit unheard of for anybody to have, a safe room in their home, to where now, the changes, if it's almost a requirement. If you live in Oklahoma, you should have a safe room in your home. So I think there's been, and Mark said this as well, there's been a lot of great strides in not only our communication, but our outreach, talking about the storms, and definitely getting that together, at least for the state of Oklahoma, because they have such a high history and high impact. And what we want to do, of course, is kind of spread this message out, because the safe rooms not only help with tornadoes, but other high wind events too that you can be protected from, such as hurricanes. Safe room types. Broadly, we have individual safe rooms for residences, and then we have community safe rooms. So I have just a little image of a safe room that would be a type that's in a garage, and then this is an example of a community safe room in Texas. I don't know if you can see that really well. It's a dome structure, and that's actually on a school campus. There's also 4 different types of residential ones as well, because you can have them outside of your house, inside of your house, below ground. There's a lot of different types there. And so, and you mentioned it, sir, at the back when you asked the question about, isn't this a greater hazard, people being on the road? And it absolutely is. So having more safe rooms in homes is one way to lessen that impact. But also the community safe room, and especially at a school district, you can't predict when a tornado is going to hit. And I think Moore, Oklahoma is a good example of that, where we had fatalities at a school. And the purpose of these community safe rooms is so that children, the faculty, your staff can be safe, and also the population that is within a quarter-mile radius. And we were talking a little earlier about the time limits and how people could get to a community safe room. The ones that I have seen now, certainly anybody could build a community safe room, but if it's going to be funded by a FEMA grant, there are, of course, a lot of eligibility requirements to building this community safe room. And you could do so through the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program or the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, both of which require the size of your community safe room to be based on the population that could access it within 5 minutes or a quarter-mile radius. Sometimes they've allowed for a half-mile radius as well. And the reason is you don't want, even though it can be room that's used for the community as a whole, if you have a large city, I mean, think of something like Houston, for example. If you have, one safe room in a school, that's not going to protect a lot of the population as you start moving further and further out, because you have traffic conditions, you have people panicking, you have people on the road. It's going to be hard for everybody to access that. So they're limited to the size by that population that can reach it within 5 minutes. So we were talking about the different warning times. 30 minutes was mentioned. I think if you're doing grant funding, it's 5 minutes that for the population. Now, I'm going to caveat that and say, we haven't seen this in practice. There are several of these that have been built in Texas and Texas schools and the community safe rooms, and I think that's fantastic. I have not seen an event where a tornado has come through to the school and people tried to get in that couldn't get in. And I think that is a possibility, and it's a risk to consider when you're looking at these community safe rooms too. You know, are you going to have a rush of people that are going to panic and try to get there, and does that result in fatalities because of people on the road? I don't know. I think the answer then is to have that two-pronged approach and have your individual safe rooms as well, so people feel safe in their homes. Within the safe room report, we looked at some of the issues. If safe rooms are so great, you know, if President Bill Clinton endorsed them back in '99, why doesn't everybody have them, you know? Why don't I have one in my home? And one of the key issues is affordability. There are a lot of rebate programs, and I'm not trying to say that there's not financial incentives and rebate programs out there. Even with that, it's sometimes still difficult for some of the lower income populations that are actually at the highest risk. You know, I think somebody mentioned too as well, mobile home parks. And that's a prime example of an at-risk population that may not be able to take advantage of even a low interest loan. Physical accessibility, I mentioned that in talking about community safe rooms, but also in individual ones too, and going back to something that Brett mentioned as well in his presentation on Tuesday, is some people have a safe room not inside their home. This would be one that's inside of a garage, but outside, and they're worried about just going outdoors at all, you know, when the sirens go off. So that's an issue as well. Quality control, and I'm very pleased to see the changes that are being made at the FEMA level with NIST, with building codes requiring safe rooms, because you can have fly-by-night contractors out there advertising to the public, here's a safe room, oh, it's certified, you know, we have this seal. It just happens in any industry, and you know, who are you going to contact? You know, do you know that this should be sponsored through FEMA? I mean, where do you go if you know that tornadoes are a risk in your area, and you know, here's this company, you know, this Erin Capps woman thinks she's very reliable and selling me this safe room. I mean, she seems trustworthy, so it's very cheap. Let's put it in. So there's been some issues too with quality control of people feeling that they're safe and putting in these safe rooms, and then they actually do not withstand the 250 mile per hour winds as the construction should, and the standards from FEMA 361. Okay. And then placement in locations not susceptible to other hazards. We actually have a story that's included in the safe room report. And what I mean about this is I'm talking about the flood hazard. You don't want a safe room that's underground where you're in a special flood hazard area. So a lot of times if you have a high wind event or with a thunderstorm or tornado, you're going to have flooding as well. So the last thing you want to do is go into that safe room and then be trapped. There have been incidents of drowning, but the anecdote that we have in our report was from a city official who refused a resident a safe room because they were in the special flood hazard area, and they had to take it all the way up to FEMA and appeals and everything, you know. And at the end of the day, I think it was a year later with the recent flooding events, that citizen came back to the city manager's office and said, "You're right. If you would have permitted that safe room and give it to, but you know, my family would have drowned." You know? So permitting and regulations are important. The safe room report has several recommendations for it, and I have some of them highlighted here. A lot of this, as I said, Mark kind of touched on, so I'm going to go a little bit quickly. But re-examining local, state, and national goals. streamlining national goals. This is a lot of what Mark was talking about with NIST and FEMA, and maybe giving something on a broader scale with financial incentives. Expanding the tent. What other stakeholders are partners that we can get involved? What about realtors? What about getting them involved with this too? I mean, what if, when you're buying a home, or when you're trying to sell a home, you can actually increase the price because you put a safe room in it. There was a study that was done, I believe it was in 2007 in the Hays County, Texas area, which is south of Austin. And they did a survey of people, would you put a safe room in your home, and do you think it would be valuable? And about 40% said it would, and the other percent, 60 or so percent said, well, I don't know, because there's nothing, you don't hear about that. You hear about energy things for your homes and how you should, be more green and everything else, but nobody's really talking about safe rooms, and we should bring, the lender and realtor market when we're talking about this. Mandatory requirement. Yes, the IBC 2015, that is for the critical facilities, and it is, if you're in a high-risk area, that 250-mile-per-hour wind zone, tornado alley, as Mark showed on his, but that is a requirement. If your community adopts, the 2015 International Building Code, it does say in there that you are to build a shelter with new construction. So I think that's fantastic. So one of those recommendations is already being met in some instance. But could we have other mandatory requirements, because we can't force people to adopt the 2015 building codes? Are there other things we could do to incentivize? Focusing on quality control, as I mentioned earlier. And then one of the big ones, the monetary assistance and expanding incentives. The at-risk populations, what can we do to help them? Are there broader grants that we can look at for states, nationwide, where they can help these? And then what can we do to expand, education and communication strategies so that our whole community sees this as something valuable and something that they should support politically? I think it's our job to try to look at inventive ways to try to get the message out and to do that consistently. And with that, I will end.